start about your family.
My name is Barbara Abrams. I was born in 1937. I just turned 78, shockingly, a couple of months ago. And Judaism has always been extremely important to me and an important part of my life. I'm a first-generation American, which makes me just thrilled. I'm so proud of that. My father's from Russia. My mother was from Poland. My father came here when he was about 2, I think. He was young. I have a picture of him. Anyway, my father was about 2. My father came with his mother and I think 3 sisters. And then my grandfather came after that, and there were about 5 more children born in the family. My father was the only boy among 8 sisters. They were raised on a farm, which is now Southridge. In those days, there were lots of Jewish farmers. They would come over from Europe and they would farm. And so that's what my grandfather did. And my grandmother raised the children, and my grandmother provided some Judaism in the home. They certainly didn't go to a synagogue from the farm, and they didn't know very much. But she had Jewish food, I think, and I think she might have lit candles. She was really the Jewish impetus in that family. And my aunts, I had all of these fabulous aunts. They were so much a part of my life. And the last one just died about 5 years ago, I think, because they all lived very old. My father did not live old, but his sisters did.
How many sisters?
He had like 7 or 8 sisters. 8, I think. I think there were 8 sisters. And none of them really were very religious, but because of their mother, my grandmother, they certainly knew they were Jewish. They all married Jewish men. And I have a cousin who almost married a Gentile man, and my grandfather told her that if she did that, he'd never talk to her again. So, there was a feeling, but there wasn't an overt practice. My mother's family, on the other hand, were very Orthodox. I had a baba and a zeta. My grandfather wore a yarmulke. He had a beard. My grandmother wore a shadel. She was a typical little old Jewish grandma with a long dress and an apron. They lived on the west side of Milwaukee after they came here. They lived right across the street of Rabbi Tursky and his wife in those days, right off of North Avenue. We had seders there. We had all kinds of things, Jewish things there. And I remember my grandmother used to bring chickens home in a big leather shopping bag that my grandfather made for her. He was a tailor. He was a shoemaker. And she would pluck the chickens. In those days, you didn't go to a kosher place, and they would pluck the chickens for you. You did that. So anyway, they were wonderful. They were warm and wonderful and very loving.
Did she take them to a slaughterer? Where'd she get the chickens?
I think, you know what? I don't know. I assume she got them from a kosher meat market, but I really don't know that. I just know that she plucked the chickens, which I couldn't believe she could have done that when I got older. And I realized what kind of work that was. But that was a very Orthodox household, and my aunts and my uncle and my mother all had Orthodox households. So I was raised in an Orthodox household, went to Rabbi Tursky's temple. And then when I got older, I always knew I'd marry a Jewish man. I mean, there was just, I did not go to Hebrew school. Unfortunately, my mother felt it wasn't that necessary. My brother did. My brother was bar mitzvahed, so when I was 52 years old, I was bat mitzvahed. I thought, this is not going to happen. So I had a bat mitzvah, which when you asked Don what the highlight of his life was, that was one of the highlights of mine. I didn't know any Hebrew. Our rabbi taught me. He was supportive of me, and it was a marvelous event. We had a friend who came in from Israel. It was great. Yes, dear?
What was Nani's name?
My mother's name?
Mm-hmm.
Her Hebrew name?
No.
Her name was Regina. My father was Saul. Our oldest son is named after my father's father, Simon. His name is Scott. And our youngest son, who is Craig, was named after my Orthodox grandmother, Caroline. So when I got older, I just wanted to create my own Jewish atmosphere. I didn't want what I had before. And so I married Don, who I don't know how we ever got together, because our backgrounds are so totally different. But we did. I think I wanted less and he wanted more. And I think that we gave each other that. I didn't want the strictness that I experienced at home, or being fearful of God as I was at home, or any of that stuff. And he didn't have much at all. So I think he liked the warmth of my mother's house, my parents' household. And we just have forged ahead as adults in the way in which we wanted to. When we decided to join a temple, we shopped around, and we joined We joined a conservative temple, which we belonged to for probably 50 years. I became the first president of that temple. I was extremely active. Don was on the board some of the time and did things too there.
Which temple?
Bethel, which then closed. That was my greatest sorrow. My greatest sorrow. I still cry about that. I just couldn't believe it happened. But
Is that on Mequon Road?
No. Yes, I'm sorry. It was on Mequon Road. Yeah, it's now a Pentecostal church. So they took us on a tour of the church, and they did wonderful things to the building. They were warm and they were wonderful, and I cried through the whole thing. I was just like, oh my gosh. So that was a big hunk of my life, learning Hebrew. I've taken many courses, including courses at the shul. In Judaism, I take a course now that meets every week with a wonderful female Jewish educator. I think she's marvelous. We're studying the Torah from a woman's perspective, guys.
Who's that?
It's great. Sherry Blumberg. Oh, you should know her. She's absolutely wonderful. So, I just continue to learn. I felt a tremendous, I was bereft of a Jewish education, bereft of understanding anything I did. I did it because my mother did it. My mother did it because her mother did it. So now I have this longing. I need to understand. I need to know. And I've spent my whole adult life doing that, I think. Not when the children were as little as they were for a while, but when they got a little older. And I had my bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah and all of that. So I don't know what else you want to know, except that
What are some good memories that you have of growing up, maybe as family holidays or family experiences or, simchas?
How did you learn Yiddish?
I don't know a lot of Yiddish, but my grandparents only spoke Yiddish, my mother's parents. So I understand a lot of it, but I never had the nerve to speak it, not even when I was a child.
How did you communicate with them?
Well, I think they would speak sort of halting English too, but between the two of them, and I think to my mother and her siblings, they spoke a lot of Yiddish. So I just sort of caught on. But there was no problem that I remember communicating with them at all.
That's how you learned what your parents were saying.
Yeah, I did. When my parents wanted to say something private, they would say it in Yiddish, and I always understood them. But I never told them that. So, what did you ask me? You asked me what are my pleasant memories.
Positive memories.
Oh, well, there was a stamp of Judaism that really was ingrained. And my mother made holidays, and my Baba made wonderful holidays, and they were happy occasions. And no, I don't want to talk about that. That was not a good experience. I don't want to talk about that. Leave it to say that I went to the mikveh with my mother once. And I decided that was not going to be for me, and I was never going to go back. And I didn't.
Was that on the west side?
Yes, it was. I don't know where we were, off of North Avenue or something in those days. That's a very long time ago. There was something, I don't know. So I was exposed to a lot of things that I embraced later, but I needed to have my own take on those things. And I did. And Don and I did together. So we really have both sort of evolved together. But my childhood, most of the time with Judaism, was happy.
Can you tell us a little bit about your father and then about your mother?
Well, my father, again, came from the farm. And my father didn't have a real religious background, which my mother did. So my dad went to Tursky's temple with my mother, never understanding a word or what was going on, but I think he liked it. I think he embraced the warmth of being there. And I remember after Yom Kippur, there was a tavern next door. He would always go to the tavern and have a drink because he was hungry. And I don't know how he had that drink, but he did. I do remember that.
A real man.
Honest to goodness. And I also remember that he would louse up the silverware between milchiks and fleischiks, and my mother would go and bury it in the ground outside the kitchen. I remember that, and I remember how ridiculous I thought that was, but that's what they would do.
Did you ever learn the explanation behind that?
No. I never learned the explanation of anything.
All right, just when we're done, I'll tell you.
That's what my adult life has been, to learn.
Okay.
I didn't know anything.
It's an interesting thing to do, but back in the day, I think, they sort of came up with solutions. Whether or not they were the exact halacha is a separate discussion, but I can tell you the source of what she was doing. But anyhow, we'll talk about that after.
I think my mother and dad's household just gave me a lot of Judaism that I
Tell us a little bit about
embraced.
your mother, about where she grew up.
Oh, my mother grew up in Poland. I mean, sort of. She came here when she was, my dad was 2, I think my mother was 5. And, I hear stories about what the ship was like, and I heard stories about how my grandfather's brother, I think, lived in Milwaukee and sponsored them. You had to have a sponsor. And they slept in his basement next to the furnace until they could afford to get their own place. I often thought that my grandparents really were heroes to do what they did. Not my father's fathers so much, because they had more money. But my mother's parents had nothing. And they came on this boat, not knowing anybody, to a strange country. I just thought that was absolutely remarkable.
Do you know anything about their experience or what they did or how they adjusted to this country?
No, not really. I'm sure it was difficult. But they met Rabbi Tursky, and they lived in a Jewish community, and they probably were supported by their community, and they were very close to Rabbi Tursky and his family. I remember my mother used to go to Lake Park and my mother's mother used to go to Lake Park and make hot dogs because they used to sell them in the summer for money for the shul.
Lake Park Synagogue?
No, not Lake Park Synagogue, Lake Park. The park above the lake, way up high. I remember those days very well, that my Baba would be making these hot dogs in the heat to raise money. So I don't know what their adjustment was like.
Did you know your grandmother?
Oh,
Your
sure.
mother's mother?
Oh, sure.
Can you tell us a little bit about her?
She was great. She was a little old Jewish lady. She was sweet. She was kind. She kissed. She created a wonderful atmosphere for us.
Are there any specific memories or interactions that come to mind when you think about her?
No, because we lived in Shorewood and they lived on the west side. So I didn't see her as often as my cousins did. My cousins have more memories of interacting with her. I just have sweet memories of her. But I don't remember any specific. And my grandfather, my Zeta, was much more removed. I don't know if I ever really talked to him very much. He was a nice guy, but he didn't get involved with the kids that I remember. My grandmother did.
Can you tell us a little bit about your mother and, what kind of person she was or the way she brought Judaism into the home?
She brought Judaism into the home every day in one way or another.
Are there any specifics that come to mind? Holidays?
Holidays were great in our house, although lots of times we celebrated holidays either at my grandparents' or my aunt and uncle's.
What was Passover like at your house?
Passover, I never liked Passover because I like to eat what I want to eat. So, it wasn't exactly my holiday. It still isn't my favorite holiday. But there was certainly an atmosphere. Oh, I remember my mother, what she did. I remember she used to bring meat home and kosher it on boards. She used to put salt on the meat and kosher it. I do remember that. I mean, she did a lot of stuff. She was a good Jewish woman.
What was Hanukkah like in your house?
Not much.
What about the high holidays?
The holidays in my house were not fun. I tried to make it fun for my children. I had decorations. I did all kinds of stuff. I don't remember the holidays being particularly fun at our house. They were more fun if we went to my aunts or my grandparents. And my mother even made a comment one time when our kids were growing up. She said, "You make it so much fun for them." I never did that. But I think that was typical of the time. But she certainly created an atmosphere on the holidays.
Did you make good latkes?
I don't even remember, Sarah, to tell you the truth. Probably.
You make good latkes.
Yeah, thanks.
Can you tell us a little bit about your aunts?
My aunts? From my father's sisters? Oh, they were just a wonderful crowd. I mean, they were loving and warm, and I loved them. They were just wonderful. They ranged, their age difference was huge because there's so many of them. And they ranged from an attorney to sisters who never went to college, to sisters who ran businesses, very successful businesses, to sisters who were homebodies. They were They had the whole gamut. And
Who
they
was Cynthia?
Cynthia? You know Cynthia?
No, Sarah was talking about her.
Do you know Cynthia? Cynthia's my cousin.
Who are you talking
Who are you?
about?
Oh, she's talking about Caroline.
Oh, Caroline.
Caroline's my grandmother.
Oh.
Yeah.
I was gonna say I don't remember any Cynthia.
And my
Never heard
mother,
her.
my mother had 2 sisters and a brother, and we saw a lot of them. But her one sister in particular, I was very close to, and we used to sleep there on the holidays because my mother wouldn't drive, so we used to go to the west side for the holidays and sleep at my aunt's, and that was lots of fun. And I'm still very close with that cousin who now lives in New York, unfortunately. Sandy, yeah. So there's just lots of good Jewish memories.
Can you tell us a little bit about your father's siblings and some of them growing up in Russia and some of them growing up here?
I don't know much about what the difference was, except that I do know that my 3 oldest aunts who came over with my grandmother obviously didn't speak English. And they went to a farm school. So they had a hard time communicating, but they learned like people do, like immigrants do, and they did fine. The oldest one was a lawyer then, eventually. I know that it was rough on the farm. I know that there wasn't a lot of money. I don't know what else to say.
What did your father do for a living?
My father? My father did a couple of things. He was in the grocery business with one of my uncles, and then he ran a tavern with another uncle, and then he ran a tavern by himself. And Don used to go in to see him when I met Don. Don would go into the tavern and see my dad.
Did he do well? Did he
He did okay.
supported the family?
We never wanted for anything. We never asked for anything much, except I do remember when my brother and I were little. My brother's 5 years younger than I am, and we would be in the car in the summer, and I would say to him, "Don't ask for an ice cream cone because Daddy can't afford it."
Did your mother work?
No. My mother helped my father sometimes, but she really didn't work on her own. Women didn't much in those days. And if they did, it was probably because they needed money, so it was not something that they were proud of. My mother didn't learn to drive till after I learned to drive.
Really?
Yeah, we used to take the bus when we would go shopping or whatever. Yeah. The highlights of my life were my marriage and my 2 children being born, but also one of the highlights of my life was my bat mitzvah. That is just very prominent for me all the time.
Why was that important for you?
It was important for me because I needed to do that for myself. I needed to learn all of that. I needed to have the nerve to do that. And I needed to do what my brother did because I thought it was really not fair that women did not do that in those days, but the men did.
So did women at all have any sort of bat mitzvah?
Not that I remember. I don't think so. At least not in my group. No. And I just thought, I got to do this.
So what would you say to your grandchildren about the way, they're growing up or their education?
Well, they're obviously getting a wonderful education at the shul. I think that Craig and his wife are creating a wonderful atmosphere for them, Judaically. And Don and I try and do that also. And I would say just take it where your heart takes you. Do what you need to do.